The Illustrious class were built as part of Britain's rearmament programme in the 1930s. Previously, a single carrier, HMS Ark Royal, had been constructed, but she was designed with a view toward operations in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. By the time the next carriers were due for construction, the situation had changed, and the primary enemy was thought to be European, which called for a number of changes in carrier design. Additionally, the ships were constrained by the limits of the Washington Naval Treaty, which capped out their displacement at 23,000 tons, a similar issue which was faced by the American Yorktown-class carriers. In order to understand the differences between the classes, and why the Illustrious class appeared to carry a relatively small initial 36-strong air group compared with the much larger American air groups, or even the larger air group of the Ark Royal, we must look at why the design changes were made. The Illustrious class were designed with two major constraints. Firstly, they were designed to operate near European waters, and therefore it was expected that no matter what air group you could fit on board, the enemy air power would largely be composed of their land-based air force, whose numbers no carrier, or group of carriers, could possibly hope to match. Secondly, aircraft had become much faster, but shipborne radar had not yet been invented. Exercises showed that based purely on visual spotting, an attacking force could arrive at the carrier before many additional fighters could be launched beyond the small combat air patrol. Therefore, it was thought that any attempted attack on the carrier was likely to at least partially make it through, and so the ship must be able to withstand hits, and these hits would be from larger bombs that land-based bombers could bring. As such, the ship was designed with a heavy anti-aircraft battery and an armoured deck designed to protect against bombs before they could deliver their explosive power to the hangars, where aircraft full of fuel, ammunition and explosives were stored. The weight of an armoured deck so high up in the ship meant that the hangar itself would have to be somewhat smaller in area and shorter in height to stay within treaty weight limits. This resulted in a hangar only 82% the size of the Yorktown class. But there was also one additional factor. The seas around Europe were unpredictable, and storm weather was extremely severe, so unlike a ship designed for the relatively calm Pacific, no aircraft was supposed to be carried on deck, as was American practice. In later operations against Japan, this practice was brought in on Royal Navy carriers and would nearly double their aircraft capacity. The Illustrious class would consist of a total of 4 ships: the Illustrious herself, followed by the Formidable, the Victorious, and the modified Indomitable, which had an additional hangar half the size of the first installed beneath the main hangar. All of the ships had very active careers and would gradually receive greater amounts of anti-aircraft firepower during these careers. Illustrious spent the first half of the war in the Mediterranean, escorting convoys and attacking Italian positions and ships, as well as launching the famous raid on Taranto, which temporarily crippled much of the Italian fleet. In one running engagement, she was hit 6 times by heavy bombs, as well as numerous damaging near misses, but would make it back into port for repairs, a testament to the defensive power that was built into her. She then spent some time in the Indian Ocean before coming back to support Allied landings in Italy, and was then sent back to the Far East for extensive operations in the Indian and Pacific Oceans against the Japanese until the end of the war. The Formidable started out in the Atlantic before replacing Illustrious in the Mediterranean, where her aircraft damaged the Italian fleet at Cape Matapan, eventually leading to the destruction of the cruiser Pola and her sister ships. She then covered the evacuation of Greece and attacked numerous shore targets before also being hit by a number of heavy bombs and sent for repairs. She then joined Illustrious in the Indian Ocean before returning to cover the Allied landings in Africa as part of Operation Torch, and then the assault on Sicily before being sent to attack the Tirpitz in Norway. Finally, she joined her sisters for extended operations against Japan until the end of the war. Victorious saw its first action launching the initial airstrike against the Bismarck, then took part in numerous escort and aircraft ferry missions in the Arctic before returning to the Mediterranean in 1942 to escort a major convoy to Malta and assist with Allied landings in Africa as part of Operation Torch. At the end of 1942, America was down to 1 operational carrier, and so she was loaned to the United States Navy for a time to work with the Saratoga until the new Essex-class carriers could be brought into service. During this time, it was found that the British carrier handled fighter operations better, but the American carrier was superior in operating strike aircraft. Once the American carrier fleet was replenished, she was recalled for attacks on Tirpitz before being sent back out to the Pacific as part of the British fleet for operations against Japan until the end of the war. The Indomitable started her career in the Indian Ocean. Initially, she was supposed to have been assigned to defend Singapore, much as Force Z with Prince of Wales and Repulse had been, so there was no chance of her fighters being available to fend off the Japanese attack that would eventually sink the capital ships. After other operations against the Japanese and Vichy French forces, she was sent to the Mediterranean for the same large convoy to Malta as her sister ship Victorious, before heading back to the Pacific for the rest of the war. After the war, a lack of finances saw Formidable, Illustrious, and Indomitable taken out of service and scrapped after various minor incidents or the wearing out of expensive machinery, as the repairs needed for these items and accumulated battle damage were deemed excessively expensive at a time of very limited budgets. The Victorious was extensively refitted into an almost new ship and saw active service in several operational areas before being scrapped in 1968 after a political decision to phase out large carriers from the Royal Navy.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.